Hey there, friends, and welcome to this Life Without Limits. I'm your host, Weston, and I'm incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend some time with me. And I trust that this conversation I'm going to share with you today will hold a lot of value for you in your life. This episode in particular marks a big step forward for me in terms of my vision for delivering this content to you. It's been a few years since I released an episode, and I've been wanting to expand into capturing these conversations visually so that you can experience the intimacy and nuance of actually witnessing the interactions rather than just listening along. So I hope you enjoy that. I'm still going to be posting the audio versions in all the places, so make sure you check out the show notes below if you want to listen and share in that format. That being said, here are some thoughts on this episode. You know, as humans, we often find ourselves in cycles of experiencing difficult and sometimes painful feelings, anger, fear, and sadness. Most of us were not taught strategies for how to properly metabolize those feelings in ways that help us move through them and past them, so we can get a little bit stuck. My guest on this episode is Rainier Wylde, a teacher, writer, and speaker who has spent a considerable amount of his life helping to catalyze the growth of others by encouraging them to get curious about areas of their lives where they feel stuck and supporting them with creative strategies for healing. I'm excited to share this conversation with you, so let's get into it. Everybody, I just wanted to introduce you to Rainier Wylde. I feel like a brother from across the universe, at least across the country. Welcome to this Life Without Limits, man.
Oh, thank you so much. As I was saying just a few moments ago, damn, it's good to connect. I'm always struck by the fact that sometimes it takes a podcast to connect with people you genuinely would like to, even outside of that, but I'm okay with it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You know, and I do think that it's really, this modern world is really interesting, right? Because 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you and I probably never would have met each other, you know, and now like through the magic of social media and really the first time I heard you speak was on a masterclass that my men's group, Modern Renaissance Man,
Oh
did a
yeah.
year or so ago, you know, and
Mm.
so I'm just a huge fan of you, man, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you today and just kind of kick it
Mm.
off if that's cool with you.
I'd love that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So we were discussing a little bit before we got started that there's so many things that we could talk about, from writing, entrepreneurship, creativity, music, food, travel, all the things, right? Um,
Mm.
but I think what particularly struck me, because I also think this is really relevant for you in the season of your life that you're in right now, is the topic of grief and
Oh yeah.
heartbreak and loss in all its many forms.
Mm.
And because I try to use this podcast to illustrate ways that
Mm.
people can move gracefully through situations like that, to also build up um, like durable frameworks and structures for coping. I
Mm.
just felt like that would be a great place for us to kind of like settle in today, and then to talk a little bit also about some interesting modalities for building, you know, a framework around recovery and cope and all that kind of stuff. So,
Mm.
um, so yeah, I mean, I guess my question was, can you ever really be prepared for massive tragedy or loss or heartbreak or, you know, something like that might occur in your life?
No, I don't really think you can. I think whatever it is and whenever it occurs, you are constantly learning the tools that you will apply in the moment that you need to apply them.
Mm,
And I think that's one of the strange inequities of life. You know, we all often imagine, you know, we're going to send our kids to swim camp where they'll learn to swim, and I think that's a great idea. All of my four kids learned how to swim, but on the other hand, I sometimes get to thinking about how the first person learned how to swim, and my guess is they didn't learn through a swim class. And a lot of us deal with things like tragedy in that way.
mm,
We didn't see it coming a mile off.
mm,
We couldn't have predicted it.
mm,
And it is, as French philosopher Jacques Derrida called it, the impossible. And he puts a slash between the I am and possible.
Mm.
That it is the thing that you thought was impossible that now breaks onto your horizon. It becomes the possibility that you are living within. And I think that's really how things like tragedy unroll and unravel our lives. It's the cracks in the ice, and you weren't prepared for it. On the other hand, I do believe that we are better equipped to deal with it by learning how to live with the gift of impermanence.
Mm.
That is, I think, the anchor point for
Mhm.
me. I think that it's something that I've had to learn across the years, so that when you do lose those things, you're not you're not terribly surprised.
Mhm.
You've actually said, no, no, I lose everything
Mm.
in turn.
Mhm.
And even though the resources that you need or the tools that you need may develop as you're going, you
Mhm.
are at least somewhat effectively clued in to what you're going through. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And I think that's actually a really an interesting concept. And I think for myself and my own experience, most of the pain was much, much sharper for me in my life when I was either holding on to something desperately
Hmm.
or unwilling to allow it to um, go out of my life. And I think
Hmm.
that concept of impermanence is really beautiful. I would imagine that a lot of people would associate it with like, a Buddhist notion or a Taoist notion of non-attachment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of an Eastern philosophy of just not being attached. Um, and and that is something that has to be cultivated, right? So I'm curious, like, what are some strategies that people might use to begin to experience like the duality of caring a whole lot about a
Yeah.
person or a situation or a circumstance, and yet understanding that everything passes.
Yeah. First of all, I actually just wanted to backtrack a little. You said we associate it with Buddhist or Taoist
Mm.
philosophies,
Mhm.
and I certainly do. On the other hand, I think that the great Western wisdom tradition of Christianity
Mhm.
offers its own unique course in impermanence. I mean, its founder literally disappears
Mhm.
33 years into his life.
Mhm.
I think that's about as impermanent as it gets. Uh, while he makes this interesting, ambiguous promise, I will send another to comfort you.
Right.
On the other hand, that's squishy. Um, and I think it actually reveals something truly beautiful in that context, in that Christian narrative. Um, Jesus, the founder of Christianity, promises that he will send a spirit that will guide us into all truth.
Mhm.
Well, what is that? It's that
Mhm.
still small voice. It's that inner wisdom that
Mhm.
continues to push us and provoke us and direct us. Now, that's very consistent with Buddhism, right? That actually we lose everything, and we have to have that inner wisdom that guides us, that wise mind that is somewhere in between the poles of emotion
Mhm.
mind and reasonable mind, but
Mhm.
that is neither nor, or both and
Right.
somehow. And so I think that we find these concepts in all the great wisdom traditions
Mhm.
of inviting us to lay everything down. Now, as far as how do we develop these tools? Well, I think we're developing these tools from day one.
Mm.
I remember being about 7 years old and going with my father, who just passed away last month.
Mm.
And so I'm filled with these memories of him. But I remember being 7 years old and going with him to an ice cream store after school, and he picked me up. And boy, doesn't every little kid want his dad just to come and pick
Mhm.
him up after school and take him to
Mhm.
ice cream. And I remember he did. Rainbow sherbet for me, cherries jubilee for him, and I
Mm.
remember it. And I remember asking him if I could get a waffle cone, and he said sure, but I'm going to go with the sugar cone.
Hmm.
And I said, well, what's a sugar cone? He said, well, you should try it. And so I think he saved himself a few pennies on that one. But can you
Right.
imagine that if I looked at that rainbow sherbet and I had the realization that it's going to melt, Dad, or I'm going to eat it all,
Hmm.
and then it's going to be gone. And then I looked at it and said, I don't want it. It's too scary because
Hmm.
it's going to be gone in a few moments.
Hmm.
Now, can you imagine what one of us would say that oh, because this thing disappears,
Hmm.
because this thing evaporates, I never wish to have anything to do with it. I
Hmm.
shouldn't even start down that road.
Hmm.
But of course, isn't that how we approach things like relationship? I see a beautiful girl, and within the first 10 minutes that we're talking, suddenly I say to myself, oh no, I can see where this ends.
Hmm.
This is going to be calamity eventually. But of course, I'm predicting an uncertain future, so maybe I say to myself, well, God, who can predict the future? but
Right.
but I wasn't wrong. It will end. Even the best relationships end.
Yeah.
My parents, again, my father passing, they were married for 55 years.
Hmm.
Wonderful, wonderful run on that one.
Hmm.
But it ended.
Yeah.
No one is predicting that anything ends. Now, my mother told me in that time, she said, oh, I was praying for a miracle. I was praying that he would be healed. And I
Hmm.
looked at her and I said, but to what end?
Hmm.
Eventually he would expire.
Hmm.
He had a good run.
Hmm.
And then I pushed it even further. I said, there's a story in the New Testament about Jesus resurrecting Lazarus from the dead, but I don't see Lazarus running around.
Right.
So even the people who were allegedly even raised from the dead, well, not forever.
Right.
Everything ends. So one of the great tools is actually just acknowledging truth. Whether it's ice cream or the human life, we all live with endings. And our choice is not actually whether or not I will engage with it, but how we engage with it.
Yeah.
Now, that right there is one of the great lessons of mythology, particularly European mythology. We see these in the northern Germanic hero quests, like Beowulf. He goes into the battle knowing something. He knows he's going to die. He knows he won't make it out alive. For the great heroes and the heroic quests, they weren't actually trying to come out of it unscathed. That was not what was at stake, but
Right.
how they will go into the battle, how they will face it. Will they face it with courage? Will they laugh in the storm? Will they have joy? And I believe that right there is the very definition of living. Will I live this finite life filled with endings and tragedy? Will I live under the hand of doom,
Mm.
going to my sure death, whether in relationship or this mortal coil, with courage and with joy? Will I live this life heroically?
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful, man. And I think that certainly within a lot of the men's circles that I've had experience sitting in, that's a very present question, right? And I think, I mean, I can't necessarily speak from a woman's perspective, but certainly from my perspective, there are these moments in time through our lives that we could look at them as like crisis points, right? Like there's the big midlife crisis that everybody knows about and talks about and gets all the airtime and press. But the fact of the matter is that, like, my parents split up when I was 6. That's a very young age to have a tremendous crisis enter into your life, right? Some children even younger, right? But
Yeah.
that was an experience that I was not prepared for. Then simple things like the first time you have sex, or graduating from high school or college, or getting married, or having a child. I mean, there's all these moments in life that, to some degree or another, demand equanimity,
Yeah.
demand, an understanding of impermanence, and a way to just gently navigate or try to move through it with kind of a noble sort of mindset, yeah, I mean, whether it's losing a human being in your life, or a job, I mean, you think back to like, the pandemic times. I mean, that was utter chaos, man, in
Yeah.
terms of like, if you really think about like, yes, there was loss of life, but there was also loss of like identity and structure and routine and all of these things. And I don't know. I'm not sure as a collective. I mean, we made it, I think, but as a collective, it was a big struggle, right?
Yeah. I remember seeing a press conference with the then governor of New York in those moments when COVID was first unleashed, or documented somehow. And I remember him saying, almost frothing at the mouth about it. But then he went a step further. He said, "This horrible disease." And of course, you imagine that you know what he's going to say next. And he says, "This horrible disease, death. We
Mm.
will fight death itself." And I mean, it's somewhere. There's archival footage somewhere of this person railing against the very notion of endings. And I thought, oh, how precious he is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, how precocious and privileged his experience must have been.
We'd say
That
bless your heart in Texas, right? Like that's
bless your heart. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly it. I kind of chuckled to myself and said, oh, that's not the enemy at all.
mm,
Yeah.
mm,
I think that to some extent, we're constantly struggling against this. And I certainly have been a lot of my life.
mm-hmm,
In fact, um, I first got acquainted with my memories of being alive in the wake of my own grandfather's death. My
mm,
first memories come about when I'm about 3 years old. That's about age appropriate. My
mm-hmm,
language centers are coming online and I'm developing these memories. And
mm-hmm,
my grandfather passes 2 months after my third birthday. And so, really, my first memories are laced with this. And one of those memories is of seeing my own father, who was just 36 at the time, sitting on the edge of the bed early in the morning, and
mm-hmm,
his hands were holding his head, and his eyes were buried there in his palms.
mm,
And of course, what's he doing? He's grieving. He's
mm-hmm,
grieving the loss of his own father. And I go up to him. I'm a very young child. I go up to him and I go to speak to him, and he looks at me, and I'll never forget, in that moment he says, "Hold on to everything.
mm,
Hold on to every memory." That's what he said. And I did. And I have to say, it's brought me a lot of suffering across the years,
yeah,
because I've held on to a lot of things. And I didn't really realize how much I had held on to until um, a number of years ago. A friend invited me to participate in a wonderful psychedelic medicine ceremony,
mm-hmm,
and we utilized 5-MeO,
mm-hmm,
or Bufo,
mm-hmm,
which is this great derivative of the poison of a frog,
mm-hmm,
and you ingest it, and for about 20 minutes you are in the presence of God or
mm-hmm,
deity, whatever that is. You are certainly out of your body, out of your
mm-hmm,
mind. And it's a funny scenario. I remember this because my friend was quite well off, and it was a private gathering in his home, which was extravagant, and he had set it up just so, and the shaman was there, and it had been brought in from a very far away, and the ceremony was beautiful, and I was one of the last of several people to go, and they had all had what appeared to me, as I watched these one by one rituals, they appeared to almost have like orgasms with deity. That's the
mm-hmm,
only way I can describe it. They're there, their backs are on the ground, their arms are wide open. They're clearly experiencing this deep and beautiful sense of overwhelming love. And God, didn't that look good? I wanted that. And so I step up to the plate, and I take in the medicine, which comes in this form in a smoke that I breathe deeply in. And boy, I can start to feel liftoff. I feel the burning into my lungs, and then I breathe it in again, and everything disappears but my lips. Then I go to breathe in the third time, and suddenly I start to choke.
mm,
And what begins to happen next is one of those nightmare scenarios
mm,
where I begin to projectile vomit, but I'm unconscious. Now, I want to say that most people, in fact, I've only heard of a few, do not experience this particular medicine with projectile vomiting.
Mm,
It tends to be like a gentle experience, unlike, ayahuasca, which comes built in with the understanding that you will purge.
sure.
Often 5-MeO, you're only purging if you're having an allergic reaction. But I
Mm.
didn't have any consciousness of that because I was off in space. But I am aware that I am hurling everything I had eaten throughout the day, including like a vast quantity of gummy bears earlier from the afternoon, and I'm just losing it in
Yeah.
that moment. And I lose it for that entire orgasmic 18 minutes. I don't stop.
Wow.
And I come to consciousness with this final hurl
Yeah.
that just comes out of me. And in my mind, which was coming back to reality, I imagine like this inky black darkness at the very pits of my stomach and this animal noise. And suddenly these men who were around me, who I think they must have been like desperately trying to clean up the mess as they were going,
Sure.
but suddenly they're all closed in on me, and
Mm.
their arms are around me, and
Mhm.
they're holding me. And it was as though I suddenly became a 3-year-old child again,
Mm.
there at the eve of my grandfather's death. And I began to weep,
Mm.
great, heaving child sobs.
Mhm.
And what I later realized was that it was as though I had crammed my being full of every care and everything. My father had said, hold on to everything.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I had packed my whole being with that. And
Mm.
in that moment, that medicine effectively served to clear everything out until I was able to simply be that 3-year-old boy again, sobbing, grieving,
Yeah.
because grief is another word for love. And in that moment, I was able to fully embrace the ending.
Yeah.
And I think that shows exactly how we hold on to things and
Mhm.
how that prevents us from
Mhm.
doing the work.
Yeah, bro, that's beautiful. I mean, I think that so I'll share a little bit about my experience and how I came to that medicine as well.
Mm.
So, well, let me first just say this: that again, you and I don't know each other personally, but I've been sort of following your journey on Instagram for the last couple of years, and I just want to say that for many men, that connection with our like fathers, grandfathers, um, is both really precious and also super complicated. And I like witnessing you in this sort of
Mm.
removed social media state, move through that process or share the things that you were experiencing around your father's passing.
Mm.
The eulogy that you delivered, I mean, again, I only saw a snippet, bro, is just fucking beautiful, man. Like
Wow.
I, and I think, and I mean, you already know that I kind of like come from the heart, man, but even just thinking about my desire for a change in a relationship with my own father before he transitions one of these days. I don't know, it could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, right?
Mm.
Is really, really present for me. And I think it took on a special kind of like warm blanket hug of necessity watching you
Mm.
go through that process. So I just want to honor you for like
Wow.
showing up in the way that you always do, man. Like with this huge, beautiful, love-centered like presence. So
Wow. Thank
so
you.
thank you for that. And I also like when we're talking about psychedelics, right? So for me, most of the pain and loss and grief that I've experienced over the last 5 years came in this really quick succession of um, losing a business that I loved, losing my second marriage,
Mm.
um, losing all financial stability that was sort of related to those couple of things, and then of course, I mean, the pandemic was it was weird, right? So that was kind of like the punctuation point on the end of it. That's just like life is fucking crazy, right? So as I was progressively experiencing those separate crises in my life, um, I was introducing like these different modalities, right? So first it was therapy, and antidepressants. Then it was like microdosing psilocybin and dropping into journaling and meditation, right? So that was layering that on top of the therapy. And also knowing that there was something about like when I would meditate that, or even when I was in talk therapy, right? And I love my therapist. He practices ACT therapy, which I am a huge fan of. But I knew that I was just holding on to something, right? Like it was still like this separation. My ego's like, we can go here, but we're not going to go way out there, right?
Yeah.
So I had a really good friend that back when I lived in New Orleans who invited me to sit in ceremony for a weekend with some heart medicine, and that essentially is, I mean, it's a variety of things from Kana to sassafras to psilocybin, um, white lily, all, you know, really beautiful plants that are designed to um, drop you into your heart space, you know, and to
Right.
really kind of connect you both heart, body, give you access to spirit as well, you know. And man, I'm telling you what I learned. I didn't have any like great epiphanies, but what happens to me in those settings is that my heart just blows open. And the ultimate outcome from that is like my only purpose on this planet is to love people, right? To
Yeah.
love people as deeply and as honestly and as bigly as I possibly can, you know. And I've found that's easy for me to externalize sometimes to other people, but it can be a challenge to show that kind of like love and acceptance back to myself, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for maybe reasons of what we're talking about. Like maybe there's still some things in there that I'm holding on to I'm so self-identified with. Maybe it's that, you know, that abandonment wounds from childhood, right? Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm a big fan. I mean, I'm obviously, we'll just do the disclaimer here on the podcast. We're not recommending people go out and do psychedelics, right? But as a modality for me, it's been invaluable, you know, and I'm really grateful to Earth and spirit and the universe and
Mm.
humans that are smart enough to discover these things and deploy them in really um, really beautiful ways, you know. So
Yeah, I think Terence McKenna said it really well, and he was a researcher and a psychonaut, and he talked a lot about these things. And one of the things he said was, when you get the message, you hang up the phone. I think a lot of people are afraid that they're going to get addicted to these things. I got to be honest. I don't think you get addicted to them at all.
you're not excited to go do that again?
No, in fact, I remember one particular medicine journey, and this was, one of the more heroic ones with peyote.
Mhm.
And I'm out in the desert with a close friend, and we had, gone to great lengths to design a ceremony. And I got to tell you, about 16 hours in to this, and just seeing a giant 12-foot tarantula looming over me while I'm terrified that my friend is turning into a vampire and it's confronting my own inner demons.
Mhm.
I gotta tell you, I thought to myself, never again.
Right.
Never again.
Right.
And I still feel that way,
Yeah.
because I actually got what I needed. I mean, that's
Mhm.
the thing. It wasn't just horrific. It was exactly what I needed to receive. And that's really my feeling on any of those particular kinds of medicines, that I don't think it's child's play. I don't think it's one of those things. The American mind is so recreational. We're so
Mhm.
leisurely about everything. I love the kind of fun-loving approach to human development and self-work that Americans do. I remember I had a client who came to me. He's like, "Hey, I really want to do shadow work." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I mean, God, it's the next thing to check off on my bucket list." And I'm like, "Oh, my friend." And that's kind of how we do it. I don't think
Yeah.
that's how these things are done. You
Yeah.
will really have to confront yourself, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah.
And that is my experience. Now, that having been said, I can honestly say, there are certain ones of us, I don't know if it's all of us, but there are certain ones of us um, who have such a difficult time releasing control.
Mhm.
We've
Mhm.
spent a whole lifetime
Mhm.
trying to gain some kind of modicum of control
Mhm.
that those medicines are sometimes the only way that we're
Yeah.
actually able to be jarred loose from our rigid grasp on reality
Yeah.
and see what is, yeah,
Yeah.
which I think has always been their purpose.
Yeah, buddy. I totally agree with that, and I think I actually sat in ceremony back in January, down in Asheville, and the most powerful experience I had was connecting with another man in that container.
Mm.
And I'm actually going to sit in ceremony next week. That's a men's group, heart medicine group, just men.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
I can't tell you like how excited I am to drop in with these brothers and just just be in that space, in that container, and like share, and it's so powerful, dude. And I think especially when we talk about control and we talk about like rigidity and all of that, I think that is like for a lot of men, like that's their default mode,
Yeah.
and that I think for me, I would agree with you 100% that I think that's been a real gift of that medicine. Like, because I'll
Mm.
go in and I'll set an intention, like it's all very, again, it's very like structured and curated and safe and all the things, right? I'll put an intention out there, and it's never happens, right? Because the medicine's it's going to give you what you need, not what you
Yeah.
ask for it to give you, right?
You take the trip you're given,
Yeah,
not the
man.
one you ask for.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's right. Yeah, that certainly has been one of those tools that has been helpful. I think also simply paying attention to life.
Mhm.
We are so ignorant of the lives that we have.
Mhm.
We don't pay attention. Um, Paying attention to life looks like observing what's happening.
Mhm.
First of all, with your five senses.
Mhm.
Most of us feel like we're telling the story of our life somehow or
Mhm.
another. The truth is, those stories are telling us.
Mhm.
The reality is that we are completely dominated, pushed around by these large archetypal tropes that we're living.
Mhm.
I'll talk to someone and God, they'll tell me a Romeo and Juliet story,
Mhm.
or they'll tell me a Julius Caesar story. And I'm like, I've heard this one before. This is boring.
Right.
The reality is that we're pushed around by the language that we employ, by the stories that we use.
Mhm.
We have become characters, bad characters, I must say, in someone else's novel that is
Mhm.
using us, using our memories, using our lives, tell its narratives.
Mhm.
And I think that one of the ways we free ourselves is we begin to observe what is and then describe it with precision.
Mhm.
For instance, I have behind me, behind this window that sits behind me, a tree that I have not looked at twice since the day I bought the house.
Mm.
Why? Well, because I know it's an elm tree and I know what elm trees look like. I'm no longer curious about that elm tree. Now, I'll start to get curious if it's diseased.
Mm.
And that's about how the human mind works,
Mhm.
that as long as it doesn't affect me, as long as it's going okay, I don't really get curious about it. As
Right.
soon as something goes wrong, suddenly my mind goes online, on
Mhm.
overdrive, and asks, first of all, what's wrong? And then very quickly, second of all, and whose fault is it?
Right.
And parenthetically, and it better not be mine.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
that's kind of how we operate in life. What we're not doing is actually approaching our life with any degree of interest,
Mhm.
right? So what does interest look like? Well, let's take that elm tree again. Interest looks like going up to it and scratching the label away,
Mhm.
eliminating the idea of a label, and kind of being Lewis and Clark about it. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I was inundated with these Lewis and Clark journals. Now, Lewis and Clark were very curious because they had certainly seen, the other side of the continental US.
Mhm.
But by the time they come out to this side of the continental United States, it's like they had never seen a tree before. Their notebooks are filled with these incredible sketches, these incredible outlines of every plant and bush and berry. And I think that that is actually a wise-minded approach to being alive. How
Mhm.
can I take that beginner's mind that says, I have never seen this, I have never touched this? Jesus said you must become like a child. You have to look at the world through new eyes. Buddha said adopt beginner's mind.
Mhm.
This is what all the wisdom traditions are saying to us. They're saying that actually you have to get curious about life.
Yeah.
And once you do, you begin to see real possibilities.
Yeah.
And so I think that that becomes a kind of training ground unto itself. Someone asked me recently, said, God, how do you learn so much? And I said, well, I
Mhm.
wish I could say it was the hundreds of thousands of dollars I spent on graduate school,
Mhm.
but it's not.
Yeah.
That actually was probably a far greater uh, cage of my
Mhm.
thinking, because it gave
Mhm.
labels and
Mhm.
certitudes and knowing this and no
Mm.
longer being curious about anything. But
Yeah.
I have to tell you, failure, when things go wrong, boy, that's a great teacher.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I literally could not agree more with that, man. And we're both parents, and I would also just say that, like, and
Oh
I'm
yeah.
not, again, saying you gotta have kids to, like, get curious, but for me, my experience as a father has been, like, my curiosity, my experience of life, my, being able to sort of, like, hold on to that childlike sense of wonder about things,
Yeah.
is amplified because of these, beautiful, creative humans that I have the honor of hanging out with for at least, 18 to 20 years of their lives, and I'm curious, like, how that has been for you, as a dad.
Yeah. I often say it took me one child to realize I was married. It took me a second child to realize I was a father. And I now have four,
Oh,
ranging in ages from almost 18 to 10 years old.
okay.
And what an interesting thing. First of all, it's taught me my inadequacy.
Mhm.
Nothing will teach you humility like children. You
Mhm.
think you know something,
Mhm.
right? And of course, I was an expert on parenting before I had kids.
Of course.
Uh, and I had a degree in human development.
Yeah.
I understood the needs of a child. I understood this principle. And every time I looked at a parent, I knew that they were doing it wrong. And of course, that I would do it right. I remember
Right.
hearing so many people say, oh my God, Rainier, you're going to be such a great parent.
Yeah.
And if I believed them.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't.
Yeah.
I just wasn't. It wasn't instinctual.
Mm.
Um, I think sometimes for men in particular, that life does not develop inside of your body. And
Mhm.
so there's a bit of a disconnection.
Mhm.
By the time our third child came about, my wife and I had experienced um, two miscarriages
Mm.
between our second or between our third and fourth children. And uh, I had a hard time actually connecting with
Mm.
my fourth child. I think I didn't want to even assume that he was alive until he was a year
Mm.
old.
Mhm. Mm.
And so I think of those inadequacies.
Yeah.
Also, my second oldest had seizure disorder up until he
Mm.
was 11 years old.
Mm.
And so to watch your child descend into something so powerful and uncontrollable that you actually can't remotely fathom or understand.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, he looks at us and says, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I just go to sleep. And when I'm awake, you're all staring at me like something's wrong.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and yet, for those of us who are present, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I think John F. Kennedy said it: the moment your children are born, they take your hearts hostage.
Mhm.
And so for me, this has been really such a growth edge and a teaching of my own humanity. And now having a child who is 18 years old, and he's doing things that I would not advise. He's doing things that I have counseled him not to. He's going a
Mhm.
different direction that I would like to push him in.
Mm.
And of course, he turns to me the other day and says, well, I am my father's son, aren't I? And I
Mm.
have to chuckle, and then I remember all kinds of things like, well, the sins of the father,
Right. Right.
my parents say. But the truth is, I'm so tickled every
Yeah.
time they challenge me, every time they
Yeah.
push back, every time they say, Dad, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I laugh a little. I go, oh yes, thank you, more please.
Yeah.
Be your own human.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
What
that,
an
man.
interesting training ground.
It really is, and it's actually quite different from, my experience as a child. I felt like was very, it was very organized. It was very regimented. It was very like I definitely like I grew up playing out in the woods. Like there was that aspect of it. But I didn't ever feel like I was fully safe to be me, right? I was
Mm-hmm.
safe, like I was loved, all these sorts of things, but like there was a capacity of like my wholeness as a human that I didn't feel like I could safely express. Now certainly didn't have that vocabulary to describe it, right? Let's sort of like, that's therapy work, right? Um, but I think as a parent, like that's really what I have endeavored to do. Um, Especially as my kids have gotten to be teenagers. My daughter just turned 21 last fall, and it's like, whoa, man, like you really got to just honor that as a person, right? Like, yes, that's my child, and we have this, relationship that way, but really, if I'm going to do right in the world, it's like doing right
Mm.
by them as a human being, and so
Oh,
that's taken a lot of
how old did
curiosity.
you say your daughter was?
My daughter's 21 and my son is going to be 15
Oh
in
my
April.
gosh.
So yeah,
Wow. April what?
April 3rd.
April 3rd. Okay.
Yeah.
Mine is April 23rd.
Yeah. He's an
So,
Aries baby and I'm a Leo, man. So we're like,
oh, okay.
I love that kid so much. Like
A lot of fire
my
there.
little homie. Yeah, for sure, dude.
That's great.
Um, so I mean, just kind of going back to that grief and loss thing and curiosity, because I do think that's an important point, right? Is
Mm.
um or a strategy to kind of deploy in those moments, right? Like when you're working with somebody in that state, um, like what is curiosity about grief and pain? What does that feel like? What does that look like,
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a principle. Anything I fully articulate no longer has power over me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, quite simply, most of us live in such a space where we are inarticulate about the life we are living.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just mean that we don't know how to talk about it. I mean that we are not experiencing it with any degree of fullness. So, for instance, I was working with someone quite recently who's having rage bubble up
Mm-hmm.
in areas of their life. And of course, when anyone comes to you to do anything like what the deeply spiritual work of, say, shadow work,
Mm-hmm.
they're coming to you to be free of this.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be free of this rage. Oh my God, it's taking me over. And so you know what I do? I give them permission to feel their rage fully.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the paradox of this is that by actually going into it, by fully experiencing it, by letting go of the idea of trying to rid myself of it at all, by giving up, by losing all hope altogether,
Mm-hmm.
by actually not just losing hope, but taking a big, wide armed bear hug of it
Yeah.
and fully embracing that thing like rage, the most amazing thing happens. Just as soon as I've given up, it stops having effect. So my invitation to this person was, right, okay, so my first assignment to you is I'd like you to feel your rage a little more. I'd like for you to go into a parking lot. I'd like you to go into this empty parking lot, close your doors, lock your doors, roll up your windows, and I'd like you to scream at the top of your lungs for 15 minutes. Well, I can't scream for 15 minutes. You're right, you're going to have to generate it.
Mm-hmm.
Now they come back to me and they say, I say, what happened? They say, well, about for the first 3 minutes, I was faking it because Rainier told me to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got to tell you, I started to descend in the
Mm-hmm.
deepest rage I've ever experienced in my life. I started to scream and yell violently, uncontrollably. And then I started to sob.
Mm-hmm.
I think this kind of gives a beautiful illustration. Another illustration I would say, which is very different, is a moment when I helped someone stop smoking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a bizarre one because, a lot of times people don't really talk to you about wanting to quit smoking anymore,
Right.
whatnot. They just quit or don't,
Right.
but this particular person had tried everything. They had
Yeah.
tried everything. I said, well, wonderful. I can't wait to help you. So your first week's assignment is to go out and buy a carton of cigarettes.
Yeah.
And she said, why? And I said, well, I'd like you to smoke as much as you want this week. And she said, I'm not going to do that. And I said, well, did you say that you wanted to change? And she said, well, no, I did say I wanted to change. I said, well, you've tried everything else. You
Yeah.
might as well try my methods.
Right.
So she said, okay, I'll do it. And I said, okay, here's my condition. I want you to smoke as often as you want, as many times as you want throughout the day, provided that you give your full attention to smoking every cigarette.
Mm.
This means that I don't want you on the phone while you're smoking. I don't want you talking to anyone while you're smoking. I certainly don't want you doing anything like reading or watching television. You must focus all of your attention on that cigarette. And again, I don't want you to restrain yourself. I want you to enjoy it, delight in it, or whatever experience you're having. She came back the next week. I said, well, what happened? And she said, I got to be honest, I smoked a half a cigarette. I said, okay, what happened after that? She said, I haven't smoked since. Well, I saw her about a year later. I said,
Yeah.
so you start smoking again? She said, I haven't smoked since that one moment.
Wow.
I said, what changed? She said, you gave me permission. And about
Interesting.
halfway through that cigarette, I noticed I hate smoking.
Mm.
I have been distracting myself with
Mhm.
talking on the phone
Mhm.
and all of those things you said not to do to
Mhm.
avoid the fact I hate the smell.
Mhm.
I hate the taste. I hate it. And the minute I had to sit with how much I hated it, I was done. Yeah.
Beautiful.
So I think these give examples of how anytime we sit elegantly with what is, like grief,
Mhm.
anytime we are fully with a thing,
Mhm.
it ceases to hold power over us.
Yeah.
So in this own process, I lost my father. Um, I have allowed myself the total ability to grieve. My sister asked me about a week afterwards. She was telling me about her day and kind of a few of her days. And she said, well, what have you done? I said, well, yesterday I got up and I took a bath for about 4 hours and then I got in bed and I sobbed.
Yeah. I'm not
And
laughing
she
at her
laughed.
experience. I
Yeah.
think that's just beautiful, right?
And she laughed and she said, God, I love you.
Yeah.
And the point was I allowed myself to do
Mhm.
whatever the hell I wanted in that moment, to kind of wallow in it. But the point was to feel it
Yeah.
really fully. I cry when I want to cry. I
Mm.
yell when I want to yell. I
Mhm.
send a message. I'm allowing it to flow through. And as one might imagine, a month later, having experienced that intense, acute wave of grief,
Yeah.
I'm not there anymore.
Yeah.
Now I'm at a different place with
Mhm.
different kinds of grief.
Mhm.
Yeah. But the permission is there. Feel
Yeah.
it fully and move on. It loses its hold.
Yeah, it's beautiful, man. And I'm curious, like, I mean, again, I'm a big fan of your writing. I think that's probably what drew me in initially, to get to know you a little bit better. And I'm curious how has that manifested in your life? You know what I'm saying? Because you weren't. I mean, have you always been a writer? I mean, I know I don't want to steer off topic here because I know we could go down the music rabbit hole, but have you always been a writer, or how has that manifested in your life?
I'm gonna answer your question by saying something that you didn't ask.
Okay.
When I was 27, I found an easel, and I bought a palette of paint and a few what do they call it, canvases,
Mhm.
and I started to paint. And I recognized that for an hour or so, I was painting and everything disappeared during that time. I
Mhm.
was totally present with what was. And I remember that was probably the first time I had ever thought about the creative act as an act of radical presence,
Mhm.
that I am simply in the flow. And and then I began to realize that I'd been doing that for a very long time, whether that was drawing as a kid during my dad's sermons, or whether that was, when I was 15, picking up the guitar and writing
Mhm.
songs, or whether
Mhm.
that was in my mid-20s performing those songs
Mhm.
in various places, which is its own creativity,
Mhm.
even though you've already created the songs.
Mhm.
Um, or whether it was painting or cooking food or writing short stories. It didn't matter what it was. That there was this thing that happened where I would simply, to quote Hemingway, open a vein
Hmm.
and let flow.
Yeah.
And that act was an act of presence.
Hmm.
It was also an act of healing.
Hmm.
I would write songs and I would have no clue what they were. They would come out full formed and within like 5 minutes. And now I look back on them and I go, oh my God, I was processing through the tragedy of my childhood. I remember I wrote one at 15. I can still remember the lyrics. Dreams can come true, but how long will they stay with you? I mean, this is a 15-year-old saying these words of impermanence. And I go, oh, that's what that 15-year-old boy was dealing with. Now, he had no clue that was coming out. So have I always, well, yes, I've always been creating.
Yeah.
I've always been trying to let that thing from the other realm come through and articulate me as a channel. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. These days, how it occurs is I pull out my modern typewriter of my phone and I chicken peck onto that screen. And what happens is something that was not there, simply was not in my mind before my thumbs touched that screen. It did not exist. And within the span of a few moments, it comes out fully formed.
Yeah.
And so I hear a lot of people say, "Oh my God, it must be so hard. How do you do this every day? How do?" And it's not like that at all. Actually, it's actually the most difficult part is the showing up.
Yeah.
That's it. But the moment you show up to it, the moment the pen touches the paper, magic happens. But you have to get past your own bullshit, like I don't want to wake up early in the morning. I don't want to, et cetera, et cetera. But once you do, magic happens.
I agree, man. And I think the one that I hear often from people is, I'm not creative. I can't do this, that, or the other thing. Right.
Yeah.
And as we're talking about ways of coping with loss or grief or heartbreak or anything like that, I mean, frankly, I think it's a beautiful, like, whether it's painting or it's cooking or it's writing or it's, fill in the blank, like, even just private journaling, right? Like tapping into your innate human creativity. Like we are, like, like we're all creative, right? And I think it's a great tool for managing through all kinds of moments in life, right? Celebratory ones, difficult ones, all that.
That statement right there, I'm not creative. Bullshit.
Yeah.
Because here's the reality. You go into a classroom, a second grade, a first grade, a kindergarten classroom, and you're instantly struck with one thing. All these kids are artists.
Right.
They all believe they're artists. They all think they're the next Picasso. Like, whatever they are not uncreative.
Right.
None of them sit there and go, you know what I'd really like to be is an IRS auditor. That's really the life for me. I'd like to, nobody says that. Now, I don't mean to say you can't be creative doing that. I'm sure you can. I just don't want it applied to any of the friends who are listening here, because that sounds like hell. Right. But the point is, on that one, you can approach life creatively at every level. Creativity is the unique combination of authenticity, experiment, the willingness to take a risk, and to imagine something more than what has been deemed possible. When you bring authenticity, imagination, and risk into the same room, I don't care if you're a used car salesman or a poet, you are creative.
Yeah.
Any of us can step into the creator's life.
Yeah. Beautiful. I completely agree with that, man. So do we want to talk about your work a little bit, a couple of the programs that, I'd love to, maybe wrap up talking about the rope and your one-on-one work and things like that. So share a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Oh man, I love this. There is nothing more beautiful than walking a journey of mentorship and friendship with another person as they discover how to have a courageous, joy-filled life. I think that is not just a spiritual journey. That's a human journey. That's what we were talking about earlier. That's learning how to live heroically.
Mhm.
under the hand of doom? How will I show up to life fully and deeply and give it everything I've got? Live in the event horizon.
Mhm.
And so I get to do that with a few individuals around the world, and I fill my days with that. And I love that. It's the greatest adventure. And sometimes it's simply the application of truth,
Mhm.
right? Uh, the truth really will set you free. And
Do
sometimes part of life is shining a mirror of truth
uh-huh.
on people so they can see their pattern, so they
Yeah,
can
that's
see their
I was
habit.
yeah, I was gonna ask if, like, that's what you feel like your role is just holding up a mirror to somebody and being like, "Yo, like, this is actually who you are. You're pretty fucking amazing, and just get used to it." Like, kinda get out of your
Yes.
own way sometimes, right?
Well, yes, and I have to chuckle when I hear you saying, like, "My role." I remember being, in some stage of life and thinking, "God, I'm a horrible friend. I'm a real shitty friend," and the reason is this, because anytime someone would hang out with me for very long, the aftermath of me was that they would suddenly leave their job, leave their place and their location, leave their marriage, whatever it was, they were always moving on. I thought, "God, this is real awful."
Right.
Um and then I realized something. I realized that was the consequence of me,
Mm.
that I'm a catalyst.
Mm.
You begin to want more
Mhm.
when you're around me for very long. You begin to
Mm.
know that more is possible,
Mm.
more is necessary, and
Mhm.
more is already here if
Yeah.
you'll but let it break through the cracks in your life.
Yeah.
And so that's what I apply. I wish I could say it was trained. I think it's pretty effortless. I think I've been doing it since grade school in
Yeah.
one way or the other. It's
Yeah.
just the consequence of me.
Yeah.
Uh, I think the other part of it is there are skills, there
Mhm.
are tools that we utilize, drawn from spiritual practice, drawn from wisdom traditions that enable us to live our life in a way that minimizes unnecessary suffering and that maximizes impact in the world.
Yeah.
And so those are things that, gosh, I've been a student of various traditions, probably since my late teens,
Yeah.
and have gleaned a tool chest there that I like to dole out whenever we walk into awareness. Because really, the thing is, like, we can see truth, we can have awareness, but if we don't pry open the bear trap,
Mhm.
we're just going to be in a lot of pain. So
Yeah.
coming up to someone and saying, "Hey, change your mindset, my
Right.
friend," like, while his foot is in a bear trap, that's ridiculous. Like,
Yeah.
that's cruel and inhumane. A
Yeah.
lot of us think that awareness is the only tool. It's not. We
Right.
have to have real and tangible and practical tools to actually change our lives, once we are free to make choices.
Yeah.
So I think those two things. You talk about the rope. The rope is this really interesting collection of so much of what I've learned in life, applied to men. Now,
Mm.
I don't say this when I'm talking to men about it, but I'll tell you what it is. It's shadow work, and it's bringing men in touch with their inner masculine.
Mm.
It's bringing men in touch with integrity.
Yeah.
It's allowing men to become their word. And it's doing so in the most unique ways, which is creating this incubator, creating this container that replicates all of the elements of their lived experience and
Yeah.
summoning them. And so for 8 weeks, I am the instigator, I am the drill sergeant, I am the best friend, I am the priest, I am the
Mhm.
confessor, I am all of these things wrapped up into one to push you towards a vision of yourself. And I've got to say that it is really one of the most transformative tools I know in men's life. I love it. It's so transformative that I have men take it over and over.
Yeah.
One guy was like a frequent flyer 4 times in. I was like, you got to stop taking this. It's now just reflecting badly on me. He says, no, every time I do, I get more out of it.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful, man. Well, I love that idea of being a catalyst. That's something that definitely resonates. Frankly, I think it's probably one of the reasons why I feel magnetized to you in a lot of ways, man. Is
Mm.
because I super resonate with that approach to showing up as a human being in the lives of other people.
Oh, thank
Um,
you so much.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I know I promised you before we hit the record button that we would try to keep this to an hour, and we're kind of knocking on the door there. But I just wanted to say that in the show notes, I'm going to link up your website, your socials, link to the book. Is there anything else that I can share or that you would like to share with anybody that's out there listening?
Uh, well, I would just say, yeah, keep track.
Yeah.
Go to my Substack. Increasingly, I post on Into the Wild, which is my Substack, as a way of defying the Instagram hegemony of 2,200 characters,
Mm-hmm.
as well as a great deal of things apparently you can't say.
Right.
And so I think that I'm increasingly enjoying that and being able to talk to people on there and share. So if you want more of what you see, go over to Into the Wild on Substack. That's WYLDE,
Yeah.
and find me there. Um, as far as, keeping step, I would say that if anyone wants to take on that deeper work, if anyone wants to actually experience that fullness of self in these ways, one of the best ways I know to do it is when you see that there's openings in my roster,
Yeah.
reach out, connect. Those don't come open a ton, and when they do, they tend to get snatched up.
Yeah.
And so I would say definitely reach out. Otherwise, there's a ton of free resources available. I give talks, I write fairly prolifically,
Mm-hmm.
and put it out there. I would say pay attention to your
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to the content of your life.
Mm.
Awareness, 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 and let it transform you.
Yeah, beautiful. So I'm gonna ask you one more question, and then we'll wrap up. What does it mean to you to live a life without limits?
Hmm. You know, I think a life without limits looks like the quality of my intention and the depth of my desire.
Mm.
Um, I think it was the poet Rilke said, "Experience everything."
Mm.
Everything. What does that mean? It means coming up to it, and well, I'll tell you actually, if I could just answer this in terms of a reality, um, and maybe this connects to what we've already said. The other night, probably a week into my father's passing, I closed my eyes and I just began to see a carousel of memories
Mm.
projected onto my eyelids. And I had to open my eyes because every memory brought pain.
Mm.
I didn't want to sit with it. It was so sad. I saw him as a child when I was a child. I saw him when I was a young man. I saw him as a grandparent. All these different moments just collecting, accumulating. And oh, God, it was like a physical knife. And I couldn't get past it. And I tried everything. God, did I try everything? I tried distracting thoughts. I tried to think about an ex-girlfriend.
Mhm.
I tried to, think about my best friend's big toe. I tried to masturbate, not to the big
Mm.
toe or the ex-girlfriend. Just almost anything that came
Yeah.
to mind. I tried to do, and none of it worked. And then I suddenly realized, oh, I can't escape it.
Mm.
I actually just have to let it play. And I have to feel it all.
Yeah.
A life without limits is being able to feel everything
Mm.
and let the river of life take you where it wishes to.
Mm.
And so I closed my eyes and I let that carousel of images play and that knife dig into my chest. And I didn't withhold myself from it. I felt everything. And you know what's so interesting? I drifted to sleep,
Mhm.
as peaceful as one could ever drift. I think that is how life works. And that's a life without limits to me.
Yeah.
It's to no longer be controlled by your fear.
Yeah. Love that, brother. So much medicine today, man.
Ah, so good. I love being with you.
Yeah, same. Look, I'd love to do this with you again one of these days. I mean, we've talked about writing songs together across the
My
coast. We
God.
can do all the good stuff, man. Rainier, thank you so much for your time, for your heart, for the work that you're doing in the world, for the change that you're catalyzing out there in people's lives. Yeah, man. I look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Yeah, me as well. Cheers,
Cool.
brother.
Thank you, brother. That's it for this episode of This Life Without Limits. I hope you enjoyed this conversation and will join me again for future episodes. If you want to stay updated on new releases, hit the subscribe button below, and don't forget to check out the show notes for additional details and links. I'd also love to hear what you think about the content of this episode, so please feel welcome to drop any comments, thoughts, questions, critique, any of that below. Thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to next time. Until then, here's to a life without limits, my friends.